everybody, and welcome to my channel. Today we are going to be making that yummy breakfast treat, the cinnamon roll. So let's get started. So to get started, I've already pre-measured my flour. It's 420 grams, which is about 3 cups, a little bit more than 3 cups of flour. And we're gonna add in a 1/4 cup of brown sugar, a 1/4 cup of granulated sugar, a teaspoon of salt, and we're gonna add in 1 package of instant yeast. If you don't use the instant yeast and you use the active dry, you're gonna end up having to substitute a 1/4 cup of warm water and a 1/4 cup of milk, because later we're gonna add in a 1/2 cup of milk, so you're gonna have to reduce it down to a 1/4 cup. So this one is great because you can just stick it right in. You don't have to worry about proofing the yeast ahead of time. If you were to use the active yeast, you'd have to proof it ahead of time. Throw it in. I'm just gonna whisk it with my hand whisk here. So for the wet ingredients, I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of sour cream to this bowl. And a 1/2 cup of milk. This is whole milk, but you can use any kind of milk. And we're gonna do 1 tablespoon of vanilla. Give this a good whisk to get everything well mixed, all the sour cream mixed in. So now that we have the wet mixture all mixed up, we're gonna throw it into the microwave for about 30-second intervals, and we're gonna whisk between each interval. And this has to go in until the temperature reaches around 100 to 110 degrees. That's usually about 2 30-second bursts. All right, so now that we have that done, we are going to add 2 room temperature eggs. Make sure they're not cold, otherwise the mixture, because it's warm, will cook the egg a little bit. We're gonna whisk between each one. Oh, it's splattered. Then we are going to add 6 tablespoons of room temperature butter. I already have mine pre-cut here. It's very soft. And then we're gonna whisk this until it's mostly combined. It's gonna be a little on the chunky side, which is perfectly fine. It's all gonna get blended in the end. We just don't want it to be these huge bits of butter, so we want little bits of butter. So we're going to put the hook attachment onto our stand mixer here, and you can use a hand mixer because those usually come with a hook, and you can also just mix this by hand and get some big old muscles. So I'm going to throw this in here. And then we're gonna mix this on low medium until the dough is tacky. And if you haven't cooked very much, the texture of tacky is when it feels sticky, but it doesn't stick to you. So we'll mix this up and I'll show you what that looks like exactly. So this is too wet still. This needs to be mixed more, and you're gonna think maybe you need to add more flour, but you don't. You just have to let it mix on its own. So give it a few more minutes, and if it still looks too wet, then maybe we will add a tiny bit, but let it work its magic first. So this is what I mean by it being tacky. See, it looks sticky, right? But it really doesn't stick to you when you touch it. So that's about where we want it. And then we're also gonna add flour to this when we roll it out. So we don't want it to be too dry. So I've laid out my mat and I've put a generous amount of flour on here. And then I'm just gonna throw the dough right on top. I have a little dough scraper, which is handy because this is, you know, tacky, so it does stick to the bowl. And then I can just scrape this right onto my mat without getting my hands all gross. There we go. See, the inside's virtually clean. All right, so we're just gonna hand knead this out until it has a nice silky texture and has a little bit of give to it. So let's do that. So this dough fought me quite a bit. It was very hungry, wanted lots and lots of flour. So that's what I gave it. But now it's come together. It's stopped being so sticky. I can push it, it pops up a bit. So that's where we kind of want to be. So I think that I am happy with that. And I will go ahead and do the next step. Looks good. So I have some olive oil and a paper towel, and I'm just gonna oil this bowl before we put our dough into it. Make sure all the sides are coated. Generous amount, that way our dough, as it's rising, doesn't stick to the edges. Because hopefully it'll rise if we did it right. So we're just gonna throw this in here, I'm gonna turn it, and then I'm gonna cover it up with plastic wrap, and I've already put my oven at about 120 degrees and then turned it off. And then I'm just gonna, it's a nice warm temperature to let this dough rise. My house is a little cold, so just having it sit out on the counter is not gonna do it. So we're just gonna put it in there, and it's gonna stay in there for about an hour, maybe 2, depending on how fast it rises. But we want it, so this is down here. We want this to be at the very tip top of this bowl. And then that's when it's done and we can go on with the next step. So now that we have our dough rising in the oven right now, I'm going to make the filling. So I'm gonna use about 1/3 of a cup of butter. Now this has been sitting out, it's room temperature, but I did stick it in the microwave for about another like 10 seconds. I want it like really, 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 really soft. So let's see here, I'm gonna take about 1/3, just stick it in here. Ooh. It is so soft, but that's what we want. Make it spreadable. And I have a 1/4 cup of brown sugar. I'm gonna throw that right in. 1/4 cup of white granulated sugar. And 1 very heaping tablespoon of cinnamon, because they wouldn't be cinnamon rolls without the cinnamon. And I'm just gonna make that into like a nice tasty paste. So I actually ended up putting in the whole stick of butter, but I made this really nice, very yummy smelling butter paste out of the sugar and cinnamon. So we're gonna use that as our spread. So let me grab the dough out of the oven. It should have risen quite well. It's been in for 3.5 hours. I had to make dinner. So let's get it out. Ooh, look at that. That is beautiful. Completely risen all the way to the top. That is gorgeous. Let's take the saran wrap off. It will shrink down a little bit because now we've kind of got some air into it. And what I need to do is sprinkle some flour on my mat here. I'm going to get a huge, like all the way across my whole mat, because we're going to roll this out quite large. There we go. Now we get to do my kids' favorite part and punch the dough. And then we're going to scrape it out of here. You know, I'm gonna go grab my dough scraper. Actually, I think this is a cake scraper, but I'm gonna use it as a dough scraper because it'll work just as well. Oh, this smells really good. It's very yeasty smell. I just dump it right out. I don't know why I find dough that has risen so nice. It's like very satisfying to open up the oven and see it nice and tall. It's very disappointing when you open up the oven and it's still flat. That's always poopy. All right, so we're not gonna really mess with this too much. I want it in a nice rectangular shape. I'm just gonna kind of scrunch it up, play with it a little bit. We're just gonna very gently kind of roll this out. We want to keep a rectangular shape if possible. And you see how when I roll it out, it keeps shrinking back in. So that means I've already messed with it too much. And I'm gonna just let it rest for a few minutes. Okay, so I've let this rest a little bit. Let's give it another go. There we go. I want to go a little bit longer this way. All right. That's good. So now we're going to go ahead and spread our butter mixture that we have here. And I'm using an offset spatula, but you can use a butter knife. I don't know why, but I found that the offset spatula just is a little bit more forgiving. I tried using a butter knife and it kind of tore up the dough a little bit. So before I completely roll this up, I want to butter my dish that I'm going to put my cinnamon rolls in. And I'm using a cold stick of butter. I mean, you can use a soft stick, but you'll end up putting more butter than you really need. And the cold butter just really coats the pan without getting too much in there. Just going to fold this down and then just get every surface. That should be good. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna roll this on the long side, and I'm gonna roll it towards the camera, towards you. And that way we have a nice long log. So we wanna wrap this up very tight. We're just gonna kind of ease it up. We want a nice tight curl. We want all that yummy goodness to be basically on every little bit that we can possibly get it on. So the first part is a little bit on the difficult side, just making sure you get everything up. Once you get it right about here, you can kind of just fold it, tuck and fold, just kind of make one big log out of it. There we go. Kind of pinch down the seam part. And the handy tool that I found to cut this, dental floss. Let me show you. Take a string off the dental floss, because if you use a knife, you're gonna end up squishing these and they're gonna be all squished together. I'm just gonna cut these ends off. That way we have nicer ends. See, what you do is you put it under flat and you go across, almost touching each other, and you just pull. And it makes a nice, clean cut. I take the ends off both of these. And cut. And I'm not gonna waste these, but they are the ugly bits at the end. I'm just gonna put them off to the side for right now. And then I'm gonna cut these in about 2 to 2.5 inch thick. That's closer to 3. Scoot it down a little bit. There we go. You can use it as a guide on the next one. I don't know if you can see this, but look how beautiful that swirl is right there. It's so perfect. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and put these right in our pan. And you want them to be next to each other, but not really touching, because they will expand. I mean, that's what you're looking for, these nice, big, plump cinnamon rolls, right? There we go. And then I'll just use the rest. I'll put them in a smaller pan, but for right now we have these ones. And these will just poof out and just expand beautifully. So once again, I'm gonna put these back into the oven, and they're just gonna stay there overnight. And I'm gonna wrap these up with, not tightly, just a loose bit of saran wrap. Maybe, there you go. Just lightly lay it on top. We don't need it to be really tight on there. We're just gonna pop them in the oven, and I will see you in the morning. Good morning, everybody. As you can see, I'm just coming off my workout, not looking pretty, but I need to get these cinnamon rolls baking, otherwise they won't get made today. I'm too busy. So let's pull them out of the oven, see what they look like. Ooh, I have 2 in there. So look how they just fluffed right up, fills up the whole pan. They smell wonderful. Let me pull this other one out. These are just the last little bits and pieces that I had before. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna cook this at 350 for 30 minutes. And in about 20 minutes, I'm gonna check to see how brown they are. If they're getting too brown, I'm gonna just throw a piece of tin foil on top, and they should look beautiful when we're done. So let's get that going. So I just pulled these out of the oven. Don't they look amazing? Ugh, I can't wait to eat these, but they're still hot. So while this is cooling, we're going to make our cream cheese frosting for the top. So I have 1 stick of cream cheese and a 1/4 stick of room temperature butter. I did zap the cream cheese in the microwave for a few seconds to soften it up because I was busy this morning. And the butter is what I used last night to grease the pan. I just left it out, so that worked out. So we're just gonna go and cream this together with some vanilla. I'm gonna put in roughly a teaspoon, maybe a teaspoon and a half. I think a teaspoon and a half, because I like mine vanilla-y. And I have made this recipe before, and for me it's too sweet. So I'm gonna add a whole teaspoon of salt. Never done this before, so I might revise. I'll add a revision in the edit if this was too much salt. But I'm gonna go ahead and cream this together. And just to let you know, I have this little scraper paddle here that I got from my lovely relatives. Thank you so much, I enjoy it. And we're gonna use that, and it will help scrape the bowl as we go. So I was just looking at the recipe, and not only does it call for 2 tablespoons of sour cream, which I forgot to put in, which is not a big deal. It's not like, this isn't like a baking thing where you have to put it in at certain times. You can just throw this in. But I also saw that it calls for 2 teaspoons of vanilla. So I'm gonna add in another extra 1/2 teaspoon since I already added in 1.5 teaspoons. Guess next time I should read the recipe before I just start cooking, huh? So now that this is nice and creamed in and smooth, I'm gonna add our powdered sugar. And the powdered sugar, it says it takes about 16 ounces, but really it's just based on how thick or thin you like your cream. So I'm just gonna add this a couple scoops at a time and let it work itself in, and then we can just judge from there if we need more or less. So I think this is where I want my cream to be. It's stiff enough that it's staying on the paddle, but it's very creamy, easy to spread. So I think this is, I'm happy with this. And I'm just gonna spread it right on my cinnamon rolls and call it good. So I'm just gonna spread the cream just right on top. Yummy, 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 yummy. So good. And if you don't like a lot of cream, then don't put a lot of cream. If you love tons of cream, then put the whole thing. It's your choice. So it's time for the taste test, my favorite part. Let's go ahead and take a bite of this. Really yummy. It's so fluffy. The frosting might be a little on the salty side, but I like that because I don't like overly sweet frosting. But if you do, just add maybe a half a teaspoon instead of a whole teaspoon of salt. But this is calling for coffee. So I'm gonna go complete my morning, have my coffee and my cinnamon roll. And if you wanna see more yummy baked goods like this from me, like and subscribe below. Have a great morning, everybody.